Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. We will now be reading Genesis chapter 31. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all his glory. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto the land of thy fathers, and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto him, Them I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father, and your father hath deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, The speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, The ringstraked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ringstraked. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father, and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes, and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up now thine eyes, and see, all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ringstraked, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowedst a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours, and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. Then Jacob rose up, and set his sons and his wives upon camels, and he carried away all his cattle, and all his goods, which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Pandanaram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he fled. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river, and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. And it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob was fled. And he took his brethren with him, and pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a night, and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said unto Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword? Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and didst not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with mirth, and with songs, with tabret, and with harp? And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and daughters? Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob, either good or bad. And now, though thou wouldst needs be gone, because thou sore longest after my father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? And Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid, for I said, Peradventure thou wouldst take by force thy daughters from me. With whomsoever thou findest thy goods, let him not live. Before our brethren discern thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the 2 maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images, and put them in the camel's furniture, and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And she said to her father, Let it not displease my lord, that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. And Jacob was wroth and chode with Laban. And Jacob answered, and he said to Laban, What is my trespass? What is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This 20 years have I been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beasts I bought not unto thee. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle. And thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God hath seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. And Laban answered and said unto Jacob, These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters, or unto their children which they have borne? Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, and I thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, Gather stones. And they took stones and made an heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. And Laban called it Jagar Shahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. And Laban said, This heap is a witness between me and thee this day. Therefore was the name of it called Galeed, and Mizpah, for he said, The Lord watch between me and thee, when we are absent from one another. If thou shalt afflict my daughters, or if thou shalt take other wives beside my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness betwixt me and thee. And Laban said to Jacob, Behold this heap, and behold this pillar, which I have cast betwixt me and thee. This heap, this heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. The God of Jacob and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge betwixt us. And Jacob sware by the fear of his father Isaac. And then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount, and called his brethren to eat bread. And they did eat bread, and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning Laban rose up, and kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned unto his place. Summarizing chapter 31, Laban's sons accused Jacob of stealing from him, and that changed Laban's attitude. God spoke to Jacob, advising him to go back home with his relatives in verse 3. Jacob told Rachel and Leah that their father deceived him, changed their wages, and that there was an agreement that Jacob could keep the spotted and speckled cattle, but also tells them that there's a dream that he had, that an angel of God spoke to him saying that those animals were given over to Jacob because of how Laban treated him, and now they need to go home. Verse 14, Rachel and Leah, their first response is there any inheritance left? He sold us and spent all the money he paid for us. But says, whatever God took from him now belongs to us and our children, so you should do whatever God tells you. Jacob then packs up all his stuff, his wives, his children, and gathered his cattle to head to Canaan, where his father Isaac was. Verse 19, Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen her father's images. Verse 20, Jacob was dishonest, not telling Laban he was going to flee. He crossed the Euphrates. In Genesis 2, chapter 14, Euphrates is one of the 4 bodies of waters flowing out of Eden, so they're still pretty close to that area. So Jacob crossed the Euphrates, heading to Gilead. In verse 22, it was told to Laban, doesn't say who told him, but Laban found out on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled. Laban took some of his relatives to follow Jacob for 7 days. God told Laban in a dream not to speak to Jacob, good or bad. Laban caught up to Jacob, immediately confronts him, saying, "You deceived me, and you took my daughters like captives. Why did you do that secretly? So I might send you away with happiness, mirth, songs, tabre, meaning tambourine, and with harp." And mirth means happiness. So he could send you away with happiness, songs, tambourine. He said he might send him away that way. Verse 28, "You didn't let me kiss my daughters and grandchildren goodbye, and that was foolish. I could hurt you, but God told me not to talk to you last night in a dream. You wanted to go home, but why did you steal my gods?" And gods, that's the same thing that Rachel took. It's called images with Rachel, but it's called gods with Laban. Verse 31, Jacob responds that he was afraid that Laban would take the daughters away by force, and then invites Laban to look through their tents because they have set up tents out here. And he invited Laban to look. Jacob did not know that Rachel took the gods or the idols or the images. Jacob didn't know that Rachel had the items that Laban was looking for. Verse 34, Rachel took the images, put them in the camel's furniture. The New International Version says she put them in the camel's saddle and sat on the idols, sat on the saddle. Meanwhile, Laban's still searching all the tents. Rachel then apologizes and says that she was for the way of women, meaning she's menstruating, and so she can't stand up off of the camel that she's sitting on. Laban finds nothing in front of everyone. In verse 36, Jacob now got wroth, meaning he got mad, asking Laban why he hunted them down and searched their things, and then gets sarcastic with them in front of everyone. "Well, Laban, what did you find? Set it out so we can all see it." Verse 38, Jacob goes on a long monologue. 20 years I've been with you. All your cattle produced healthy offspring. I didn't eat any of the flock. I incurred the losses of the animals eaten by beasts and the ones that were stolen because you made me pay for them. I was hot. I was cold. I didn't get enough sleep. I served 14 years for both daughters and 6 years for the cattle, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father had not been on my side, you would have sent me away with nothing. God saw my affliction and has rebuked you. Verse 43, Laban weakly responds, "These daughters are mine, these children are mine, and all that you have is mine. But what can I do? Let's make an agreement." So these two men took a heap of rocks and made a formation of rocks and ate on them, and they both gave the heap of rocks names. Laban called the heap Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galeed, and this means heap of witness. Galeed, Galeed Mitzpah. See, Mizpah. So Jacob called the heap Galeed Mitzpah in verse 48 and 49. And Laban was the one that called it Jagar or Jaeger Sadahutha, but both loosely translates into heap of witness. And Laban continues, "God will be watching you if you harm my daughters or take another wife. I won't pass this heap to harm you, so don't pass this heap to harm me." They swore by the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and the God of their father. They ate, they stayed there all night, and then the next morning Laban had a proper farewell, kissed his relatives, and went home. Some highlights of chapter 31. The chapter starts out, Laban's sons accused Jacob of stealing, and Laban grew suspicious of Jacob, which was correct. In chapter 30, verse 37 through 43, clearly documents Jacob figuring out that certain branches, taking them and putting them in the water supply or putting them near the animals when they're mating, will cause their offspring to produce these different types of animals' colors. And the agreement was that Jacob could take the ring-straked, speckled, and grizzled Animals. Ring-streaked means circular stripes, speckled means spotted, and grizzled means a roan pattern. And roan is a mixture of red, gray, black, brown, and white. He noticed when he used certain branches and put them near them when they're mating, the offspring would come out like that. So he kept doing it until he had a lot of very strong animals. So it was dishonest. And Jacob means, again, to follow, to overreach, to deceive, to circumvent. And that's exactly what he did here. He circumvented their arrangement by figuring out a loophole, just like he did with his brother, just like he did with his father. Jacob calls both of his wives, Rachel and Leah, and tells them, I've worked for your dad a long time. He's now treating me different. He changed my wages 10 times, and now we had this agreement that I could have the spotted cattle. In verse 4, God tells Jacob simply to go home. That's all God said. Get your stuff and go home. But Jacob told Rachel and Leah how unfair Laban has been with him. And because of this, thus, therefore, God gave your father's cattle to me. So now God is telling me to go home. So Jacob is puffing it up a bit, putting on airs. He's exaggerating what happened here. God just told him go home. And their first concern, their first response, Rachel and Leah, is, does our father have anything else? Because at this point, they're angry with him. The sons are angry with him because of how many animals Jacob has. And Rachel and Leah, knowing this, seeing the discrepancy, they're asking with uncertainty, is there anything else? That implies that they're unsure if there's anything else left. So we need to know, is there something else we can have? Because, you sold us, but you know what? What's yours is ours. What's yours belongs to us and our children. So let's go. Whatever God tells you, let's just go. Before they leave, in verse 19, Rachel stole an item that was important to their father Laban. In the King James Version, it says that Rachel stole images. In the New American Standard Version, verse 19 says that Rachel stole idols. And in the English Standard Version, verse 19 says that Rachel stole household gods. Well, an image is a statue, a visual representation, or a picture. The idol, an idol, is an object of extreme devotion, an object of worship. But it also can be an imposter, an icon, a hero, and that definition was grouped together. A household god is a household effect or a household good, a product, a revered idea, custom, or thing. In verse 19, and every time Rachel is discussed with this image in the Bible, with this item in the Bible, the word used is image, or the word used, it's one of those variations. So like in the New American Standard, it says Rachel stole an idol, and the English Standard, it says an image. But in verse 30, every version refers to this item as a god. When Laban asks Jacob, where are my gods? Every version, Laban, that variation of what term is used, it doesn't change. In every version, Laban calls these the gods. But every time Rachel is mentioned, it's image, and every version changes. So it, like in the New American Version, it says she stole an idol, and then the English Standard, household goods, and it's like that with each time she's mentioned. And what this may indicate is that this item was really important to the father, but it was more of a trinket to Rachel. And this was mentioned right after their response, asking, like, does our father have any other inheritance? So the father sold them, spent their inheritance, and now what she has is she has access to these gods. These, the it's an image to her, but it's a god to her father. In verse 24, God spoke to Laban in a dream, telling him not to speak to Jacob because he was pursuing Jacob, because he was mad, because he left deceptively, and he was deceptive. But he was wrong too. And God told him, don't speak to him, don't say anything good or bad. But of course, Laban disobeys because he's angry. In verse 26, Laban confronted Jacob angrily and asked why he left like that and why he took his gods. And then he was embarrassed immediately after searching and finding nothing in front of everyone. That's when Jacob turns on him and angrily recants Laban's dishonesty from verse 36 to verse 42. And then ends that because in verse 36 through 42, he's telling him, you made me pay for the animals that got eaten or the animals that got stolen. I was tired. I didn't get enough sleep. So he goes through all that. Now you changed my wages 10 times, all of that. After after Laban pulled up on them, hotly asked them why he left, searched their things and found nothing, even after God told him don't do that. And so now Jacob's going off on him, and he's ending it saying, if I didn't leave the way I did, you would have sent me home empty-handed. And Jacob looks pretty good right now. In verse 43, Laban folds because he knows he's been beat at his own game. And he goes, what can I do? God warned Laban before he was embarrassed. And then even in verse 24, he tells Jacob that. He says, hey, in verse 24, he was warned. He tells Jacob that God told him not to talk to him in verse 29, but he did it anyway. And so in verse 44, he goes, well, if you can't beat him, then join him. So let me force an agreement. Laban was in no position he has no no goods anymore, no wealth. His daughters are on Jacob's side, and you've made a fool of yourself by searching through these things and finding nothing. So you really have, it seems as if Laban was forcing this agreement because he's got nothing. Jacob is just doing it out of the goodness of his heart. If out of the goodness of his heart. So this story illustrates another example of deception to gain control specifically over a man. In verse 14, Rachel's first response to Jacob saying we have to go, her and Leah ask, and every time they're mentioned together, it's Rachel and Leah because she was loved more. So that's just another detail to point out that love, the kind of women a man might love, Rachel then Leah every single time, even though Leah was married first. And she seems to have done the most for him, but it was Rachel and Leah. Her first response to Jacob saying we have to go is, does our father have anything left? And this again implies that this is after verse 9 when Jacob explains that God gave me your father's cattle. So he's telling him, I have most of what your father owns. And they respond going, well, yeah, what's yours is ours, so let's just go. And it says in chapter 30, verse 43, Jacob increased exceedingly. Cattle, servants, donkeys, camels. So Rachel knows that he's wealthy now. He's asking, does our father have anything left? Verse 16, she goes, our father sold us and devoured our money. So God took our father's riches and gave them to Jacob. So again, demonstrating a lack of control. Now the inheritance is in Jacob's control instead of theirs. And their father did not do a good enough job of managing that. So not only did he mismanage their inheritance and gave it all to Jacob, or Jacob was able to deceive him into taking it, Laban turns around and sells them. And then he turns around and treats Jacob unfairly. So in verse 19, Rachel stole her father's images, idols, gods, the items that her father wanted to know about. Rachel stole them. And then in verse 34, Rachel stole them, hid them in a camel saddle, sat on them, and then told Laban she couldn't get up because she was menstruating. So again, using deception is maybe she was, but using that in a way to deceive a man because she has lack of control. Concerning the idols, Jacob didn't know that Rachel deceived her father. But Jacob was dishonest, first with his brother, then with his father, Isaac, and then he was also dishonest with Laban. So seeds of dishonesty blossom into a harvest of dishonesty, and we don't know how that harvest will produce, what forms those seeds will take. I thoroughly enjoyed that chapter, especially learning about what Rachel stole and seeing that the words change when it was Rachel. It seems like it didn't mean anything to her the same way it did her father Laban. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to study with me this far, and I look forward to reading Genesis chapter 32. Have a wonderful day.